Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Unpacking Organization, where Rupert and I talk about our passion topic, which is org design, org effectiveness, workforce planning, and data driven organization design. Everything under the sun, but mainly org design. So, Rupert, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, living the
What
dream.
was, and in that dream in the last 1 week, what is something exciting happening?
Well,
Like,
my second son, it's all about
mhm.
you want to raise them so they can be ready and flee the nest and go off on their own. So my 17-year-old is heading off to Zimbabwe this evening,
Oh,
where he's
wow.
going into the middle of nowhere to coach kids how to play touch rugby
Wow,
um,
that's
and
fantastic.
help build a village or do something of that size. He's gone for a couple of weeks. Um, which is going to be very cool. So he remembered his passport, so that's the most important thing. And his malaria tablets and Imodium just in case he eats the wrong thing. And so yeah, that's exciting. So I think that will be life
Oh,
changing for him.
that
And
is exciting. That
yeah,
is amazing.
and what about you, Shradha?
Well, there's nothing to top that up, Rupert. So I'll just say that yesterday I actually tried archery for the first time.
Oh wow,
And that was really fun. It was me and my husband. We went for an outing and there was archery. And seems like I am not bad at it. I won't say I'm good at it. So it was really
did
a
you beat your
good thing.
husband?
What? Yes, yes,
Okay,
yes,
that's what
yes.
that matters.
And made him scared.
Right,
So,
perfect.
Unpacking Organizations, the Practitioners Podcast. Sponsored by Orgvue.
But we have all the bit of have a guest with Garth Andrus with us. Garth,
yes,
lovely to
welcome.
Thank
have
you.
you here. So Garth has a very illustrious career in many big firms, and also has written a book that's been seven
Seven languages.
languages translated, which is pretty impressive. So lots of people are going to be interested in AI and the impact of AI on org design. It's probably the hottest topic at the moment, and I think it's fair to say, Garth, that you're probably one of the world's leading experts in that field. But before we talk about that, it would be great. How did you become this expert, and just to hear a bit about you?
Sure. First of all, and thanks, Rupert and Shradha. It's good to be here. Good to be here with you. And yeah, so a little bit of background. I actually started my career as a professor at Vanderbilt and George Washington University. So my whole world was really wrapped around all the models and approaches and so forth for org and talent areas. And then I got recruited into Andersen Consulting, which later became Accenture. Was there for quite a while, and then ended up at Deloitte. So I spent most of my career at Deloitte, where I was leading the talent and organization business for Deloitte for many years, and then on the board of Deloitte Consulting, where we ended up buying lots of companies, including a lot of AI companies, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and the kind of the impact that had on organizations. And then during COVID, decided to do early retirement, and then did a few things since then, and then got a call from Andersen Consulting, where I started my career. So I kind of went full circle in the consulting world, and back at Andersen Consulting, which restarted about a year and a half ago, and was part of Andersen Global, which is a large tax firm. And here we are today. So I'm leading the talent, basically the talent and org business, focused heavily on the AI side, but also doing org and talent and so forth. So it's good to be
Amazing. It's amazing to go
Very
full
cool.
circle. When you got that call, it must have been quite a
here.
moment.
Yeah, I was very surprised. So it's great to be here. We're growing, and also I had the opportunity, as you mentioned, wrote a book. We wrote a book called The Technology Fallacy, and that book we did research together with MIT for several years on companies that are very successful or not very successful in implementing and rolling in digital transformation in the company, which included AI. But now it's even more intense. And I know we'll talk more about that today.
Yeah, Amazing. So we have the right man to talk about AI and how to leverage it or not fall into the fallacy and the traps, I guess. So, Garth, just with that, just at a high level, how do you see the impact of AI on organizations and org design? Maybe two parts. So the impact on the actual organization, the org design, and the process of org designing.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's very interesting, and that a lot of companies are now to the point where they're realizing it isn't just the technology, right? This goes back to the research we did with MIT and the book we wrote. That the premise of the book is basically this: if you put in technology, new technologies, emerging technologies, and so forth, and you think nothing has changed or needs to change, then and you try to act business as usual, that's never going to work. What's different about this is the impact on the organization is that a lot of people are still thinking of this as a technology transformation, of which it's not. So usually we rolled out, Oracle or Workday, whatever it is, and then there's an impact in work processes and some new jobs and things like that. And it's about adoption. It's about using it in the right way, maybe some redesign of workflow, maybe a little adjustments in org design, but not as significant as what's happening with AI. AI is changing everything. It changes workflow. It changes skill needs. Skill needs are completely dynamic now, right? It has to be constant, and very tailored. And then it affects governance, who can make decisions, how decisions get made. It affects performance management. How do we incent for these types of things, and so forth. So it's really very disruptive to the entity of the org and almost every facet. I have an approach, having had that academic background, I'm always looking for models and approaches. And so I did a meta-analysis of all the org design approaches that are out there and found that in a practical world, having been academic and then been in the practical world after that, as far as being in clients and making these kinds of things work, I found that there were great things in some of these models and some deficits in some of them. So I basically blended the best and created a few things that were new and came up with a new model where I really look at 12 specific areas that affect the organization when you implement a technology or any kind of major transformation like that. So that's from an org standpoint. From org design, it kind of alluded to it, but to be able to have these kinds of decisions, a lot of organizations are taking out a lot of levels. And I think that's the first thing we're seeing. They're collapsing levels from 8 to 4 or and so forth. Sometimes they don't always do it right. They'll get rid of those people when they could have done some retraining and really made some opportunities for people to grow and move into new roles. And sometimes it makes sense. They might have been bloated from overhiring and things like that. But from an org design standpoint, you can't always go into let's take a large oil and gas company or a large manufacturing company who has 12 or 14 levels and say overnight, you're going to have to change your org structure. They're not going to do it. Their whole world's built on that, and it will take them a long time to be able to go through that. So what I've discovered is that in many cases, you can leave those things in place if you change decision rights. You change how decisions get made, or you come up with other creative ways. So if you do that, you could still have many levels. Now, 12 or 14 is pretty excessive, and you do want to try to compress some of those. But you want to be able to make different decisions, and you're expanding decision rights. So I remember talking to a client one day, and they were saying, well, we can't have people make decisions about that. They've never had that kind of opportunity to make decisions, and it's out of their area. And so I draw a picture and I do a little square, and I say, this is their decision rights today for that group. We're not saying go like this and let them make every decision possible. All we need to do is like make it a little bit bigger and say, you can make decisions about X, Y, and Z. And a lot of times they look at that and say, I have never thought about that. And so that's a really interesting way to really help from an org design standpoint, is to really get in, because we always think of org design, a lot of people do, I know you probably do not, about boxes and wires. And in boxes and wires, it's really not about really fully that. It's more about how decisions are getting made and how fast decisions can be made and the responsibility and so forth. So from an org design standpoint, I find it that it's probably the best time to be in this kind of career and world of org and talent and consulting in general, because everything's getting upended. Things are changing so fast. And what kinds of things can we do to make the organization more effective through org redesign and through organizational dynamics and the kinds of things that we can do to change the org?
It's fascinating. And I'm so glad that you're saying it, that this is the best time to be
It
a
is.
practitioner in this space, which is all the more exciting. Garth, as you said, that everything changes because more so in the AI implementation. And we are seeing that as we are looking into the organizations. But it's also, I agree with you 100%. But what happens then is that we get into that deer in the headlights
Yeah,
syndrome, because there is so much changing that your brain freezes and it gets overwhelmed and we don't know where to start. So then we don't start at all. And then we keep on, like, sitting on it, that, this is just a fad, it will go away, it never will. But how do you help your clients to to highlight or to attain that starting point where they're able to get over their inertia or the
sure.
feeling of overwhelmness and then start this process?
Sure. That is such a great question. And it's really interesting that what I found is general change management is really not effective in when you're putting in emerging technologies that are changing and upending things like AI, right? And the reason
And what do
is,
you mean by general change
yeah, so
management?
when we do stakeholder identification, stakeholder alignment, uh, communication strategy and planning, and maybe some resistance management. That's simplifying change management, but that's essentially what we do on technology projects and so forth, and training, right? And so that's not enough, because you have to think of this as not a technology implementation, but a transformation, because it really is, right? So how do you help with the change? So long ago, I recognized that was a problem. So I was looking for a new way to do change, or an enhanced way to do change. Now, the things I described are still essential, but they're table stakes. You have to do those, right? But it's not enough. So I found a concept in Agile called minimum viable change. And now I have to admit that it's really just a 2x2 matrix, but I love the concept, and it was really designed by somebody who doesn't know much about change management. But I love the concept that they were like, make small changes, micro changes. So I started going into that pretty deep several years ago, and came up with an approach called minimum viable changes that they had, but put it on steroids. So what we found is many small incremental changes that have action focused. They're very action focused, and then we look at the value component of that. What's the value to the organization for doing this change? What's the value to the employee, and what's the value to the customer for doing this change? And some of those are quantitative and some of them are qualitative. Then what I found over time, then we look at how you would implement that, and they're all short. They're typically 2 weeks to 12 weeks, those changes. So let's say, for example, you found a policy that actually was keeping people from doing their job right, or you had performance management criteria that was actually disincenting people to do the new behavior you wanted them to do, right? So that change might be a little shorter. The policy one might take 2-3 weeks, and you change that policy. But you look at the impact, you track it, and so forth. So there's a lot more measurement to this, but it's micro things. It's micro measurement aligned to business objective. But one thing I really discovered in change that really, really helps, and that is asking the question, and we do this with every MVC that we do. And the question is, okay, if we don't do this particular MVC, which is usually a small piece, what happens? What would happen? And if the answer is not much, then it's probably not a good thing to go after. But I'll give you an example of it. But the answer is, hey, there's a lot that can happen here. Then it's very important to do that. And then you use the teams that actually are responsible for that to kind of craft that MVC, and they feel much more ownership. So what I found is it really reduces change resistance because you're doing it with the people. And I would say 90% of the time, the teams have all been focused, all said, this is something I've been wanting to do, or I didn't know how to do this. I've been wanting to. So instead of imposing that change on the team is much more involved, but it becomes part of their job. So you're not really taking people away from their job, but they're doing it. So if you ask, like I mentioned, if you ask people, well, what happens if we don't do it? So here's a real live example. So with a large insurance company, they were having problems with the business not understanding analytics, and the analytics team not really understanding the business very well. And so we tried to understand the issue. We went through that process I just described. We said, okay, what would happen if we did something here? What happens if we don't do something here? Well, the answer is if you don't do something here, you're going to continue to have misaligned analytics. You're going to have decisions being made in the wrong way. You're looking at the wrong analytics that don't really matter, and so forth. So what we did, the minimum viable change we came up with was to create a role called analytics translator. And what we did is we looked first to see if the analytics team could actually play that role. And what we found is that probably wasn't going to work in most cases. They might be a little bit more engineering focused, and maybe a little bit more focused on the analytics themselves, and maybe not, function may not have had that experience. So we found that the business, typically MBAs and others that maybe had some experience, maybe somebody from human capital, was better at linking those two things together and learning the analytics. But then you can't stop there. So the second MVC was, how do we create a career path for analytics translators? You can't just put people in a role and there's no place to go. So we had to create a career path. And that's the same with AI in general. And by the way, this was an AI project. AI was being implemented in the company. And that's what we ended up doing. It was highly successful. We've noticed that many companies have done that since. There are many analytics translators roles. So if you look that up, you'll find jobs in analytics translators all over. Not saying we created it, but we really did not know it existed, and it came up with something.
And so Garth, are you creating, because it sounds like each of these almost like backlog items on a Kanban board and sort of an agile software development process. Is that the right metaphor for thinking about this? Because you obviously can only do so much.
Yeah.
Or is it more organic than that?
It can be both. We've done one where it's very formal, where the teams have already done Kanban boards and really kind of more true agile. And there's others that say, look, we're not going to do that, but we want to be more agile, right? A little bit more organic. Let's make things a little bit easier. Let's change decision making. Let's make decisions faster.
So what's in that second case? What's the process then? So how's that governed, like practically?
Yeah. So in the projects that we do, and then we lean that on into the client, it's really kind of like having a COE. We actually did create a COE, an analytics COE out of this one. Mm-hmm. But there can be a COE related to the minimum viable changes.
Right.
And so
it's almost part of the transformation office or the change office.
It's part of that.
And they're just going through, listening,
Yeah.
getting ideas, saying that sounds like a great idea, and sort of can do, let's do it.
Yes. And
Yeah.
that we did that at a large utility and actually did exactly just as you described. And then they carried that on after we were done. The whole idea is that, as we do as consultants, we try to have the teams being able to do it themselves. And that's what happened at this organization. However, one last thing about how do you get people to do this? We did this at companies like GE and American Electric Power and a lot of other really interesting large companies. We found that if you find the executive who has clout, who has already bought into the idea that we need to transform in different ways and it's not business as usual, we would then spend our time going to that leader, in addition to all these other change, things we've been discussing, and talking to them about these things. And they typically really like the approach because their heads are already wrapped around that. And what we found is they were the best at, and we used them as sort of the informal connector leader. They may not necessarily even had a formal role in this project, but then we would do something in their area and things would start moving. So when I was in, within one of these large organizations, I won't say which one, but I was talking to the CIO of one of the divisions, and all these divisions are very different. And he said, "Hey, Garth, what's going on over in this group?" And it's a different business. And I said, "Why do you ask?" And he said, "Well, a lot of my people are transferring over there. And I want to know why. And I hear all this buzz and lots of things are going on." And I said, "Oh, they're doing," all the things we have just been talking about. And things were changing. People were excited about it. And their jobs were, being able to change. Decision rights were being changed. Some structures were being changed on how we did reporting and who could make decisions and how and so forth. And he said, "Well, I want to do that." And so we linked him up with our leader and so forth, and then started doing it in that part of the organization. We found that was also very key in the change process.
So I also see that it's not just change, but the traditional transformation office or the PMO office
Mm-hmm.
needs to understand these practices and start implementing these practices in order to ensure that this is being truly transformational, right?
Right.
Because I feel that the transformation office has always been like more waterfall or like, doing things from a
Reporting.
traditional reporting, and that needs to also
Sure.
fundamentally change.
Yeah.
What I hear from you.
Yeah, yeah, it does, and it's really interesting because there's been several cases where the leader from the client has said, "I'm not happy with the PMO, and I see you guys are doing this. Why don't you guys do the PMO?" And we're always like, "No, we're not doing the PMO side." And so he said, "Well, how can you help the other team do that?" So exactly what you said, Shradha. It's about getting to and helping that particular part of the organization.
Sounds
Yeah.
like it's, if I would use another metaphor, it's a pull system rather than a push.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think top
Yes.
down, I'm pushing down, this is the change, finding it centrally, which is disempowering to those people. That's why the people are probably moving
Yeah.
business unit to
Right.
organic pull. This is what makes sense, and kind of an
Right.
empowering
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
I'm curious, Garth, in your book, was it the innovation, the technology fallacy? What is the fallacy?
So the premise of the book really is, and what the fallacy is the idea was you can't just put in technology and think everything
It's
else is
about
going
the
to be great.
people.
Yeah, it's about the people. It's about the org.
The systems thinking.
The
It's not
systems
just
Very much
about
a
thinking.
system. My
something.
model is very much a systems thinking model. The 12 things I mentioned to you. It's about how you organize work, how you operate, and how you behave every day. And each one of those has 4 areas. So it's things like structure and work, processes, governance, talent management, performance management, rewards, policies, geography, physical environment, those types of things. Those are the kinds of things that we look at, and we basically create kind of like an MRI of the organization through those 12 areas and see what's what's a challenge, what's a blocker, and what's an enabler. Because one of the things, also going back to your earlier question about change, we found that a lot of people will just try to push a change rather than looking at what's working. So what are small areas or facets of the change that are already working? And so we leverage off of that. So when we do this analysis, so we call it organizational DNA. These areas are how your culture is manifested every day in the organization. You can call your culture whatever you want, but the reality is how leadership is, how all these things that I just described are. And so that's kind of how we look at that.
Well, what's interesting in your model is how you haven't been afraid to put all the elements of the system in the model.
Yeah.
Because what people are often trying to do, and I'm guilty of this, Garth. In my books, I talk about 4 beliefs, and my second belief is the org is a system and it's all connected. And so you need to understand the connection. And then my third belief is it's ongoing, it's continuous. And that's why I'm a believer. And you need the fourth belief is you need this capability in house. You can't just outsource it to the management consultants. You need to own this and have that internal capability.
Yeah.
So the org's a system. So within that, when I wrote my book, is I purposefully tried to make it simple and not have too many elements in it explicitly, because people can't get their head around too much stuff and you overwhelm them. But you've got 12 components in your model, which is certainly more precise than my model, because I excluded things. I talk about them subsequently. How do your clients react to that? Or are they just, with AI, they're getting more comfortable now? Is this like an evolution, like people are just getting more comfortable?
I think some cases they are, and I think others. Like I was talking to a friend and who was with I won't tell you which level in the organization, but they were with a big group. And they said that the reality is they're not actually implementing a lot of AI as they would like to. And there are companies that are taking off. I saw a thing the other day that said there's 1% of companies that you could consider massively going after AI in a full-on, assault going after it, right? Others are doing it in pieces and parts, and that's okay. That's how a lot of times change will happen. But the point is, going back to your point about organization as a system, the reason we do those 12 is because a lot of times in transformation, we will take one area and say, oh, we're looking at structure or we're looking at leadership, and they're not looking at the interaction between those. So all these 12 are all connected in some way. So it's actually really simple. So we do an assessment. So it's basically a diagnostic, and with some interviews, usually about 10 interviews of senior executives. And then we usually do a workshop with middle managers, because middle managers are the ones that have to deal with this every day. So we'll work with them, and a composite of that will come back and say, here's a blueprint of your DNA. But before we do that, we typically say, what are you trying to do as a business? What's your objectives and what things you're trying to do? So what I do first, before I do that, is I say, okay, here's what your DNA looks like across these 12 areas if you were to achieve those objectives you just described, your business goals and your vision. And sometimes they'll look at it and go, oh my gosh, we are so far away from that this is never going to happen. And they have two choices there. They can either continue that path, and we can help them make those changes iteratively, and some of them are larger and some of them are more iterative, or they can say, let's adjust that goal set and the timing and so forth. So I find they don't want to change the timing and the goal. So we say, okay, here's the reality. Let's find out where we're at today. So we do that assessment and those interviews and so forth. And we come back to them and we say, here's the delta, right? And this is something we're used to in consulting and so forth, right? And we'll do this, but it's very precise. We'll say structure, these micro things will need to change. Leadership, these micro things will need to change, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
This brings me to another question, is that great thinking around how do we bring them along the journey of the systems thinking? But how do we bring them their own journey about thinking? Because not every leader is ready to embrace this. And
Right.
so, do you enable the leaders as well? First, it's kind of chicken and egg situation
Right.
that, if your leaders are not ahead in their thinking and journey, then they can't bring the organization along. And if the
Yeah.
organization is not ahead, the leaders can't come along. So, how do you break that
Right.
cycle for them?
So it's funny you mentioned that. I actually have a project right now where we're assessing the senior leadership team, and then we're running using AI. We'll take the analysis of the goals that they're trying to get to as a team. We now have the assessment of the skills and leadership capabilities of the senior leadership team. And then we use AI to say, what's the match? What's the missing? Where's the gaps for them to be able to, as a leadership team, to actually make this happen. So doing that also is a little eye opener to the leader, where they look at that and go, oh my gosh, I've never had that kind of realization about what the company's trying to do and where I'm at. We'll know that at a micro level of where they're at. We'll also know it as an aggregate of the leadership team. And you could do that at any level, by the way. You could do that in a function. Very often, transformation happens in a function first or in a business unit. Back to the point of, who's kind of like trying to make something happen. There has been some where we focused right with the CEO, the entire C-suite. We have many examples of those, where then they try to push it out across different parts of the organization. Then there's others where the CFO, for example, is all in and says, we've really got to get this figured out because we're spending a lot of money on AI. We're not seeing the return, and they need some help to think through this. So we find a lot of CFOs are very interested in this and often are our sponsors. Then we're finding also that the CHROs are taking a lot bigger role in AI transformation. So, for example, at ServiceNow, Jackie Canny, who used to be at Walmart, CHRO, and is there. Her role is actually her title is actually Chief People Officer and AI Transformation Leader. So we're seeing that more. So by getting it done in a function, and she's really going full in on making the function change. When the people in the organization start to see that, the leaders often look and say, I've got to figure out how to get on board, or I'm not going to have a job here. And they keep hearing that in the news. Your job's going to be replaced. Your job's going to be replaced. And we try to help them see the thing, which you've heard many times. It's really not. It's more about, if you can be very valuable using AI in your job, you're probably going to have a job, and it's going to be more effective. So it is, and some of them are like, I'm out. I'm not doing that. And we see that just kind of take the exit and so forth.
I
So
like that line that you said, that if you're able to use AI in your job, probably you'll not be out of job, because that is the crux of it. So thank you
yeah,
for sharing that.
sure,
Mhm.
sure.
Garth, unfortunately, time is always against us, as the mighty Morpheus said in The Matrix. Um,
That was
but
really quick this time.
Yeah, I like
it
that.
always goes
Yeah.
fast. It's just particularly. So, Garth, just there's a lot, and obviously we've done the fallacy, so I wouldn't want to repeat not putting people first and the capability of the people in order to. So you're not allowed that one. So you one tool and one trap that doesn't fall into that bucket. That would be great.
Yeah. So I'll take the trap first. The trap is I think the real risk in AI is not leading. It's like leading like nothing has changed or nothing is changing. If we're still leading in the same way and we're still doing the same approaches, that is the biggest risk right now to companies who keep trying to do that. I'm actually speaking at a conference called the AI Conference in September, and that's the title. The title of the talk is "Why Your Organization Isn't Why Your Organization is Designed to Make AI Fail." and what you can do about it.
Love
Yeah, I
that.
like that.
Yep.
Yeah,
So
you're failing the way you are right now, or the way you've been is failure. So you better change, otherwise you will be run over. Yeah,
right, you're going to get run over, and some of them are
yeah,
already seeing it. Right,
yeah,
it's happening.
yeah.
So, but the kind of the hook, the idea of like, what do you need to be thinking about? I think that's what you're asking. Is that right?
Yeah, well, just a practical tool. So our listeners, they can tomorrow, a little bit like your minimal viable change, one minimal viable change that our listeners can say, right, I've got that, I can take that.
Exactly. And that's where I would go with this and you have to think about it like we've been talking about as a system. It's a systems approach. These same pieces are connected and so forth. But yes, do one small thing to make a change in a process, in who can make decisions, or how, expanding those decision rights to others. That's the one thing that kills. Think about this. That's the one thing that kills AI in a company. You have all your old decision rights in place, and you then have democratized AI in the company, but yet you've handcuffed them and said, but you can't make any decisions, right? Or you can only make the decisions we've always told you could make. Well, you've just crushed your investment in AI, and it's going to be, minimized at
And
best.
I think with that, it's what's the worst that can happen?
Yeah,
If you make a decision and you make a bad decision,
Yeah.
then what's the so what? If the so what is it's really easy to undo it, then there's no big risk. Because
yeah,
people can get so uptight with decision making,
yeah,
and to liberate yourself and the team saying, well, what's the worst that can happen? And then if it's not that bad, so they make a bad decision. Because the upside is unquantifiable in terms of empowerment and speed
yeah.
and agility. So yeah, it's a point well made. And I think when people do org design, and I mean, as a lot of listeners will know, I'm not a fan of the RACI model, but what the model I use is RAD, which is who's responsible for the decision, and then who has the A as approvals, and you can count it up. And if you've got more than one person involved in a decision, you have to really ask why.
Yeah.
So if you
Right.
have someone approving it, sometimes you need to because there's tension, and so that's an investment in bureaucracy to
Yeah.
stop things going really badly. So that's being conscious about that is fine, but how many of those do you need? Do you need more than one A?
Right. So back to what's the one question you can ask? I would always ask this question: what happens if we don't do anything? And if you look at changes, small changes or macro from a C-suite view, or in my job, if I don't make changes, what happens if I don't do anything? If the answer is not much, then okay. If the answer is a lot, then you got to make some changes. I'm sorry. Go ahead and your question.
No, I was just saying that is there any decision making
Oh,
tool or like, any framework that your go-to is?
well, I kind of use my framework with AI is how I'm
Okay.
usually used to doing it. So I'm finding out that almost everything I do is linking back to business objectives and vision about what they really want to have happen in the organization. And that isn't the vision of what I think will look like, because I think that's something we as consultants can help people figure out, or they can. But the question really is a little bit more about what are you trying to do? And it might be, so for example, I was with a client the other day that we have, and they said, look, we want to grow. This was their objective and vision. We want to grow. We want to double revenue, but not double headcount. Okay, that's nice and clear, right? And so they said, that's what our goal is. And then we want to use AI tools to help us make that happen. So now we have an approach to be able to go do that and find out where we can use AI to help make things happen. But I'm usually using AI with my model, with the business objectives, and running all sorts of analyses. I'm just amazed at it's really opening up to your whole creativity. If you get the deep thinking ones that are in Claude and in ChatGPT and Grok, and those types, it's amazing what you can do.
It surely is.
Amazing. Unfortunately, Garth, time's upon us, but thank you so much. lots to ponder on, and I hope the listeners will apply something tomorrow quickly. And
Yes,
Shradha,
thank you
thank
so
you.
much.
Thanks for having me. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. Good to speak with you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you all. Take care. Until next time, Rupert. Bye now.
Bye.
Unpacking Organizations, the Practitioners Podcast. Sponsored by Orgvue.